my pleasure to introduce Jason Combs here this afternoon. Jason works at Miller & Associates right now. He works with urban planning and archaeology. Jason is a syndicated columnist. What is that on, Jason?
So at least once a month I have an article come out in a couple different trade journals for antiques and collectibles. So
He explains it a lot better than I can. Previously, Jason was a professor of geography at UNK for 18 years, and prior to that, he was at Arkansas State University. He has written a number of articles in referee journals such as Great Plains Quarterly, Great Plains Research, Material Culture, and others. Jason has co-authored 2 books, one on Civil War book published by Ohio University Press titled Do They Miss Me at Home? That was it in 2010. And the other one titled Pioneer Life on Glass, the Balcom Green Collection, that was published in 2012. And he has another book coming out in the near future, so we're anticipating that coming out as well. But the Balcom Green Collection, that book was published by the Center for the Great Plains Studies at Emporia State University. Jason and his wife Gail. Gail, if you'll raise your hand, this is Jason's lovely wife. They have been married for 26 years? 25. Yep. Okay, still on 25. I thought he's done a number of speaking presentations. Okay, Gail is an amazing physical therapist at Brookdale Northridge, correct? They have 2 grown sons, Tate and Oliver, and one of them just got married.
Yes, I'm a daughter-in-law.
Yay! And soon, hopefully grandkids. Jason and Gail's business is Burr Oaks Antiques and Appraisals. His cards are up here if you're interested. Jason is a certified appraiser. He appraises antiques for insurance purposes. So like when I had Jason come in, that's kind of how I got to know him. Our house hadn't been appraised, the antiques in it, for years and years. And so Jason came in and updated that list to what prices are put on antiques at this time. So that's a valuable service. Jason and Sherry Morrow, many of you know Sherry. Sherry's on the Buffalo County Board of Commissioners, I think it is. Jason and Sherry organize and run 2 antique shows per year, and it's at the old Ramada Inn, if you remember where that is. The new name is the Clarion?
Yep.
Okay, here in Kearney. And they're typically in November and again in March. And this year, it's coming up, November 8th and 9th. Get ready to shop. Vendors, how many vendors?
right now I think we have 15, but we'll probably be around 20.
Okay.
Yep.
It's a lot of fun. They really bring their wares and bring it out, and it's a lot of fun. You might remember Jason from NTV's The Good Life show with Carol and Ronnie. Jason typically was on and he shared antiques from his collection and what makes them collectible. Jason has also taught a class at the senior college, the geography of American antiques. Jason is an antique collector. Gail will testify to that. And he collects pottery, windmill weights, postcards, crocks, cash registers, scales, and such. But he has an eye for antiques. These 2 are a great team. You know, with Jason's antiques and Gail's decorating ability, wow, they're a really amazing team. Jason has estate sales, and he has been on the Antiques Roadshow. With Mary Haverly. He has been to the Antiques Roadshow. Mary was on TV. Jason didn't get on TV, but he was there. So if you know Mary Haverly, that was an experience. He can probably tell you a story about that as well. Please join me in welcoming Jason Combs.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. I mean, what an introduction. I'm associated with Sherry Morrow and Mary Haverly, so I don't know. That's kind of a tough combination to be yoked to. So as we go through this, please at any time jump in with questions, comments. This is kind of the next step in my postcard insanity, if you will. Gail, my wife, is really concerned about my postcard collecting. I think I need, some kind of a postcard recovery club of some kind or something. So here we go. Does anyone know this postcard? And don't say where this is, but does that look familiar to anyone? That image. Note, this is a scan of a postcard, it doesn't say where it's from on the image side of the card. Any takers? No. So even if you know where it is, just hold on to that. But it's good that nobody knows where it's from. So we'll see this coming up again. Over the years, collecting postcards, I've just stumbled into these cards. And so this article was based on cards just like this. The entire image is supposed to be of a school, of a main street, of a community, and it's just overwhelmed with trees. I just thought that was really interesting. And so I kind of went down this line of research. So Made in the Shade, tree postcards from the Great Plains and their connection to urban design and the promotion of place. This just came out in Great Plains Quarterly. So we'll zip through, and as we do, this maybe is a little bit text heavy, but I want you to think about early Nebraska history, early Great Plains history. The state, the boosters, the newspaper editors, they were pushing people to plant trees initially for farmsteads. Again, there were very few trees across the Great Plains, and so they were encouraging farm folks to plant trees, primarily for livestock, for windbreaks, and then that kind of evolves into cities and towns planting trees. So here we go. In contrast to what many experience in older eastern states, known for the majesty of their forests, so again, this is the East Coast, pioneers coming west found a more challenging landscape, really challenging. As Wilman Droz points out, the American people hesitated for approximately a generation at the edge of the dry, treeless prairie, reluctant to attempt to cope with land so unlike any which they had known in the past. So people coming west had no idea what to do with this treeless landscape. Early boosters and promoters, along with territorial and state governments across the Great Plains, sought to rectify the situation or at least put a positive spin on it. And we'll see that. Historian Everett Dick notes that local Nebraska newspapers urged prospective immigrants to bring fruit trees and shrubbery and to set them out and care for them. So they were expected to bring trees with them as they came west. Railroad companies were also part of the larger effort to refute the idea that the Great Plains was a desert and to establish the concept that the Plains region was an ideal place to make a home. So again, in terms of making a home, making a farmstead, you needed trees. This project takes the idea of boosterism and connects it to early tree planting efforts in the central Great Plains, specifically Kansas and Nebraska, to present the region as a progressive, soon-to-be forested wonderland. As for why, consider Everett Dick's contention that treelessness was seen to be a problem, something akin to a family scandal, as everybody knew it, but any reference to the skeleton in the closet was made in whispers and just among ourselves, lest it scare away prospective immigrants. So again, it was in our best interest to kind of overcome the perception of place, this treelessness. Transitioning from early tree planting efforts, this study then connects those early initiatives to community design and urban planning. Design standards coupled with tree planting efforts eventually revolutionized landscapes and influenced how many Great Plains communities were promoted and sold. One way to analyze these efforts is to evaluate contemporary postcards. So how did they sell place? How did they promote the Great Plains? How did they promote the Great Plains? Beyond booster proclamations and newspaper columns, postcards in the early 1900s were one mechanism to visually capture and present communities in a positive light. And trees were often a major component to the image, intentional or not, to make the case. Early bird's eye views along with landmark images often presented communities in the Great Plains with few, if any, mature trees in sight. How about this one on the right-hand side? It says bird's eye view of Oakley, Kansas. If you can see that very well, the nearest tree is Vancouver, Canada, Oakley, Kansas. There's not a tree in sight. So these early postcards, 1905, 1906, 1907, this is what they look like. There's not a tree in sight. So here we have on the left-hand side, it says a view in Polk, Nebraska. How about Riverdale, Nebraska on the right-hand side? Riverdale, Hill and Buffalo County. There's not a tree in sight. So the earliest postcards look very similar to this. How about this one? Bird's eye view in Springview, Nebraska.
Still looks a lot like that.
Yeah. Definitely the surrounding area around Springview looks, so this is right up against the South Dakota border in kind of north central Nebraska. Springview might have just a couple trees today, but around it, no trees. But again, this is the landscape in early 1900s. Not a tree in sight. And I love that image. Look at the windmills when you look at the landscape across there.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
Yeah,
8.
yeah. I don't want to deviate, but I'm working on an article right now on early water systems in Nebraska. So I'll come back and tell you about that later. So here we go. Here's early tree planting efforts in the Central Great Plains. A century ago, Johnson and Cobb pointed out that the absence of tree growth has been a hindrance to the most rapid development of the region known as the Great Plains. Many early settlers, tired of the struggles against rigorous climatic conditions, have sold out and departed. So many people hesitated to come to the plains because of the lack of trees. Those who did were kind of confounded by that problem of no trees. Historian Everett Dick notes, agrees with that assessment, and adds that in early Kansas history, due to the lack of trees, little or no fruit had been gathered in the region, but that quickly changed. Fruit trees played an integral part in the field of agriculture. In 1869, the Kansas State Horticultural Society, which preached the gospel of tree planting, displayed a pyramid of 140 plates of beautiful apples and pears, with the state receiving the gold medal for the best display of fruits at the Horticultural Hall in Philadelphia. So 1869, the state of Kansas sends to Philadelphia this massive display of fruit tree products. Again, to try and overcome this imagery that Kansas was a desert. There's no trees. Nebraska took similar efforts. Prior to statehood, J. Sterling Morton, an early member of Congress and later Secretary of Agriculture, supposedly planted 400 apple trees in Otoe County in 1856. Just 2 years later, the steamboat Asa Wilgus deposited passengers along with some 55,000 fruit trees, evergreens, and ornamental shrubbery in the territory. At the same time, 71,000 fruit trees were received at Brownville in Nemaha County, with R.W. Furness, who later became governor, starting a local nursery with 50,000 apple trees. In the 1890s, the Omaha Daily Bee took the idea of tree planting even further, suggesting that the planting of shade trees should be carried on systematically in every city. So again, look at these early reports. 50,000 trees, 70,000 trees, and much of this was windbreaks and fruit trees. But then in the 1890s, you see the Omaha Daily Bee talking about in every city we should have trees as well. Just a year after the Timber Culture Act, J. Sterling Morton offered a resolution on January 8, 1874 to designate the second Wednesday of April to be made Arbor Day, to encourage tree planting, to make homes more attractive and comfortable, and yield a revenue besides. Again, the reasons to plant trees: attractive, comfortable. It became more official in 1885 when Nebraska legislature named April 22nd, Morton's birthday, as the date for the official legal holiday. So Arbor Day begins in Nebraska and now is international. A few years later, the Omaha Daily Bee noted that J. Sterling Morton had done more for the honor of Nebraska than any other man who has yet lived in this state. So let's just slow down and read that one. J. Sterling Morton has done more than any other person in the state of Nebraska. Tree planting is honor, science, and the highest type of development in civilization. I mean, that's some pretty grand language. At the same time, Nebraska's Governor Silas Holcomb declared that no greater service to this state can be made at this time performed by a Nebraska citizen than by devoting one day of every year to the planting and cultivation of trees upon the broad prairies and fertile valley lands. And a year later, he proclaimed that Nebraska was now the tree planters state, and with that, Nebraska's moniker switched from the bug eaters to the tree planters. So did anyone know that we initially were the bug eaters, then we became the tree planters? So now the corn huskers, but you know, bug eaters is kind of intimidating. Maybe we should go back to that. So bug eaters to tree planters. Booster efforts were followed by the State Forestry Service in Kansas, distributing 100,000 trees in the spring of 1890. And over the next several years, those efforts rapidly expanded. I mean, look at these numbers. In 1892, this is in Kansas, 320,000 trees. Jumped to 1.7 million in 1893, and in 1895, the State Forestry Service distributed 3 million trees in Kansas. At the time, trees cost approximately 40 cents per hundred, and one Kansan commented that as years go on, these trees will develop a value to the community. These early efforts obviously paid dividends. Dodge City, for instance, was initially described as barren, with nothing to soften the bleak outline of prairie or sky, had one resident in 1892 stated this: the trees were seldom out of sight in contrast to when he had first moved to town. The only groves visible were the illusory forest, consisting of a clump of sunflowers or a few straggling cottonwoods which skirted the streams. So it really revolutionized the landscape. Similar numbers were found in Nebraska. Edward Braniff, writing for the New York Times in 1902, explained the Bureau of Forestry's goal of supplying convenient timber resources to an area where probably no trees ever grew before. Noting that the Sand Hill District includes a wide belt of rich agricultural lands populated by prosperous farmers, where there's a need for cheap timber supply to furnish materials for fence posts and poles and lumber for houses and barns. Again, the initial efforts, windbreaks, fence posts, building material for barns and houses. Then look at this last one. 2 years later, the Kincaid Act of 1904 brought free distribution of trees to farmers and ranchers west of the 100th meridian. So Cozad, Nebraska is on the 100th meridian, everything west of Nebraska. It was reported that 1.8 million saplings were furnished by the Bessie Nursery at Halsey between 1912 and 1924. For these plantings, the number of applicants for the trees was just over 9,000. So we're talking hundreds of thousands and millions of trees being brought to or grown in Nebraska. With these efforts and time of adequate rainfall and strong commodity prices came a different perspective. Johnson and Cobb state that trees and shrubs are essential to the making of a real home. I just like that quote. Not just a home, a real home. Again, you have to think about where these folks came from. Across the plains, the first step in planting should be to provide a windbreak or shelter belt, which will afford protection from severe winds and furnish shade and comfort to both man and beast. Bode goes on to point out that this generation, who are no longer land seekers but land owners, so again, make this distinction, comes a new demand for trees to make Kansas homes more livable. And that tree planting is not an impossibility, that it is a necessity that it will pay in some form or other sooner or later. Recognizing it will not be an overnight process, Bode concludes that the desolate plains of Kansas are rapidly becoming farm homes and the homes are being beautified. It is not unreasonable to dream of a day in which the plains will be spotted with trees, marking the prosperous homesteads of the wheat farmers of the sunflower state. Again, these grand statements, promotion of trees. Why all these efforts, especially given the effort and expense involved? Some reasons are clear, others might be questioned. Obvious reasons: orchards, fuel sources, benefits of shade, protection from the wind. In the 1860s, the Nebraska Advertiser declared there is no crop that will pay half so well in the long run as trees. A few years later, Maximilian Kern, how about that for a first name? Maximilian Kern wrote that the trees were agents of protection, combating the howling storms of winter and the exhausting heat of summer, concluding that well-sheltered cattle quarters are nevertheless a great necessity for each farm. Walter Prescott Webb agrees and adds that high winds on the level plain accelerate evaporation, and establishing windbreaks was essential. So again, a lot of this to farming and ranching. The cause gained such importance that early settlers believed that planting a tree was a public duty, which one undertook not only for himself, but also for his neighbor. And citizens were urged to plant trees and thus fulfill a duty to your country, your family, your posterity, and yourself. I mean, how about that? I mean, kind of a biblical reason to plant trees. The Wichita City Eagle, for example, stated that every person ought to do something in his lifetime for the benefit of those who come after him, something for which future generations would rise up and call him blessed. Who can estimate the good that would result if every person old enough to do the work could be induced to plant one tree by the roadside this year? In Nebraska, at the same time, the Columbus Journal encouraged readers to plant trees to provide fruit and shade, not only for your own use, but for the generations which are to come after you. The same thing in McCook. And so note, they're talking about generational benefit, not just for here and now, but the generations to come after us.
Question.
Yeah.
How big were the trees that were?
About as big as your thumb or finger in diameter. So, little bitty guys. Any other questions? So,
What was the survival rate?
minuscule. Yep. So, I've never seen any calculations on that. I don't know how you'd ever track that, but not many survived.
Do we know the varieties of trees they planted?
Red cedar. Red cedar.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion now. So, because now they're paying people to get rid of the cedar trees in Nebraska. But it was somewhat dependent on what you could order. I mean, a lot of it was fruit trees, so kind of think old jewels and fruit trees. But it was kind of a mix. So,
This may be, I'm sorry, this maybe goes to the survival, but so my understanding is that prior to all this planting, there were some cottonwoods amongst the plat, like running
Yep.
alongside it.
Yep.
What conditions changed to make, because seeds from other trees would have eventually spread their way, what conditions changed to make trees being able to finally successfully grow in places where they weren't growing? Is it because they're starting as saplings, or?
Artificial watering.
yeah, that'd be part of fire.
No prairie fire.
Well,
And
yeah,
carrots.
at Fort Kearney, there were no trees, but there are letters talking about how the soldiers had to load up barrels in the wagon and go down to the river and gather water and bring them back to the fort to water the
To water
saplings.
them?
I
Yeah.
think it's also important to remember that we're basing this conversation on European settlement and not what this area looked like before European settlement. So to say that it wasn't conducive to trees might be a little bit of a misnomer if we take our history back a little bit farther.
Yeah. Most trees need 10 to 15 fire-free years to become established. Once trees get so large, they can withstand the prairie fires, but it looks like at that time, much of the grasslands would burn, kind of on an annual basis, so they think that's primarily the reason why wiped out a lot of the early trees. How about this one? The second point, historian Craig Miner points out that tree planting had for some time been thought a panacea that would improve the adaptability of the plains climate and make contributions to changing it. And not just change the climate, but specifically, if I could speak, bring greater rainfall. Consider Kern's pronouncement that the promotion of trees will result in an ameliorated climate, a more copious and regular rainfall, a more equitable temperature, greater beauty of landscape, and a chain of other substantial and permanent benefits to the farming community. So again, the promotion of trees and all these grandiose statements about what it's going to do to the climate. So here we have this one.
But it's also interesting, her comment that it was European forces. The indigenous people did just fine without trees.
No, but that's not really what I was saying, but
Well, but they were,
We don't really know the history.
they're trying to transform it into something that it wasn't,
yeah.
so they could farm it.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Jump in, I enjoy that. So let's shift gears a little bit and apply this to the cities, the towns. Not only were tree planting ideas popular in metro communities in Europe and cities along the East Coast, but obviously throughout the Midwest and Great Plains as well. Historian David Danboom states that President Roosevelt in 1970 created the Country Life Commission to examine rural issues and offer solutions. 2 years later, the report recommended that rural people to beautify their homes and to make them more convenient, in part to keep pace with their increasingly sophisticated urban cousins. To that end, Plains residents were told that any truly civilized region required trees to surround fine homes and to grace courthouse squares. So again, you can see where we're going with Postcards, the courthouse square. The Omaha Daily Bee adds that the wealthy may adorn their homes with carved pillars and expensive ornaments, but no architectural skill can give to a residence that comfortable, home-like appearance, which a few fine trees will. So again, the promotion of trees now kind of shifting to the cities across the plains. In regard to design, geographer John Hudson points out that the late 19th century conventions of urban design that guided them held that the simple grid pattern was sufficient for smaller cities and towns across the Midwest and Great Plains. So when we think about early urban design techniques, if you will, the United States, and really in particular the plains, we have grids of square blocks. Grids of square blocks. And in Nebraska, in a lot of cases, we were really creative in terms of naming the streets. A, B, C, and then we got really crazy and went 1, 2, 3 the other way, so it's a little humor there for you. So, but then we added trees to the mix. So a grid of square blocks and add trees to it. Nebraska legislation in 1871, for example, encouraged tree plantings soon turned from agricultural settings to small towns and communities. Town lots adjacent to a street where trees should be planted should have plantings on both sides of 1/4 of the streets of the city until the city had shade trees. Again, that's from the state legislature in 1871. The Omaha Daily Bee in 1894 contends that the Park Commission should be required to take care of shade trees already existing and to plant uniform rows of trees in every street and avenue within the city limits. Again, that's in Omaha, but please note it says plant uniform rows of trees. So kind of keep that in mind. A similar scenario played out in Kansas. The Hayes Free Press notes that trees planted along a street should be of the same kind, the same size, and uniformly spaced. So again, we see uniformly spaced again. On narrow streets, trees planted every 40 feet apart and alternated on opposite sides of the street will be found sufficiently close. On wider streets, they should be from 40 to 60 feet or even further apart, the distance being determined partly by the size which the tree is likely to attain by other habits. How about this one? Current in 1879 concludes the planting of shade trees in towns and cities is practiced everywhere. No improvement of greater interest to the public can be made nor created at less cost. Inhabitants of prairie towns especially should unite in one common effort for the attainment to this end. The planting of suitable shade trees should be exacted by ordinance from every property owner. So again, look at this language. There's nothing more important than this. And now they're saying the state, the cities should dictate this. That every city should have these ordinances to push tree plantings. With the tremendous popularity of postcards, communities were able to take tree planting initiatives to the next level by visually confronting the idea that the Great Plains was a barren, treeless landscape. Even though not mentioned in many captions, the intent is clear. Trees dominate many early postcards in comical fashion from the central Great Plains to shape the perception of place and demonstrate that progressive communities had come of age. What did they capture? Churches, courthouses, post office. So again, we've taken the last 8 or 10 slides of me just kind of reciting what's in that article. Let's just zero in on this. It's one thing to talk about, the state legislature in Kansas and Nebraska were pushing trees on the farmsteads and communities as well. But now look at what postcards did. They could capture images from these postcards to present a new story. So we saw the early postcards, 1905, 6, 7, 8. There's not a tree in sight, right? Now look at the series of cards just a few years later. On the left-hand side, the Presbyterian Church and Parsonage in Columbus, Kansas. So think about being a photographer, trying to capture these images. Hey, go take a picture of the church. And what we were presenting from the Great Plains is, we can't take a picture of the church. The trees are in the way. Go take a picture of the schools. Well, the trees are everywhere. There's just trees everywhere. How about this one? This is the courthouse in Salina, Kansas, that you can barely see.
Were the trees actually there?
Yep. How about this one? That's just ugly.
Franklin.
But it's Beatrice. No, that was actually in Kansas. Beatrice is coming up. So on the left-hand side, the Franklin School, Argentine, Kansas. This one's from Leota, Kansas. You can barely see the school. It's just completely covered with trees. Oh, yeah.
They have something to climb up there.
Yeah, here's my Beatrice, Gage County.
What year?
These were all early, probably 1910 to about 1915. These
So
cards.
the trees grew pretty fast.
Yeah.
They must have been watered.
So the tree, like the one on the right-hand side, that was probably doctored. So maybe that question, I need to rephrase that. The trees would have been there, but they probably added in a little bit of splash of color and size and...
Oh, they're doctored.
Yeah, yep,
Photoshop.
yeah, early Photoshop. So Columbus, Kansas. How about this one? The Gage County Courthouse in Beatrice.
because the trees could not have grown that fast.
Well,
That's just not an attractive image.
perspective, sit on the ground to take the picture, or stand up to take the picture too.
So here's where we started on the left-hand side. You might know where that's from. It's the Custer County Courthouse in Broken Bow. How about the post office in McCook? And again, you know, on this one, the uniform spacing of trees. Several of the articles talked about that. Red Willow County Courthouse, McCook again. Here's Kearney. It's a Solomon Butcher cart. And when you look at that, I mean, the trees are just perfectly spaced. And that's a real photo. So you can get an idea of how tall the trees were then.
Oh, it's the
Kinley
Kinley
School.
Kinley School.
So more postcards coming. Postcards from communities in Kansas, Nebraska also reveal how trees played an integral role in design and planning. In Kansas, for example, images from Coffeyville, Emporia, Parsons, and Pittsburgh all present residential neighborhoods lined with trees running parallel to the sidewalks and streets. A design element noted years earlier by the Western Kansas World reads, "Here in Kansas, we have made a specialty of planting trees in our towns and cities. This was begun way back in territorial days and has kept pace with the growth of our cities. Until now, all our cities and smaller towns are noted for their tree-lined streets." So again, they're promoting what's been happening over the last couple decades. A similar scenario played out in Nebraska as well.
Did the Homestead Act require tree planting?
No, the kid.
I don't think so.
Just improvements on the ground.
Yeah, just improvements and building a residence space.
I believe it did.
The kid,
Required
kid,
trees, yes.
Kincaid
Timberline,
did.
the claims did. Yeah, Timberline did.
There's stories about people carrying water from the river up to the trees you had to plant, you know. And you had to make an effort, they didn't have to grow, but they had to prove that you made an effort to make that.
Yeah, yeah. So how about these from the towns across Kansas, Nebraska? On the left-hand side, this says a view from Coffeyville, Kansas. So I mean, look at the sidewalks and the streets, and again, look how uniform those trees are.
Yeah.
Union Street, Emporia, Kansas. The presentation, again, Nebraska, I would argue this is kind of off subject, but Nebraska produced more postcards than any other state by far per capita. And where did they go? Primarily east. And so again, we were selling Nebraska to family members and, you know, folks we knew back east, so to speak. And what were we presenting? Trees.
It's kind of a combination. The Homestead Act itself did not require trees, but the related Timber Culture Act of 1873 allowed that you could get an additional 160 acres by planting trees.
Yeah.
If you were a veteran, you didn't have to. If you weren't a veteran, it was more strict on planting trees.
To me, the postcards and the trees are kind of symbolic of a city's commitment to permanence. If you think of, like, you know, we were talking about how long it takes for trees to grow, that is this kind of, because I assume that these postcards are in large part in efforts to convince people to move and settle here.
Oh yeah.
That it's a commitment that not only are these structures temporary, it's a commitment that there's planning, there's commitment to stay. We're looking at future generations as kind of like a hopes to ensure that this isn't gonna become some kind of a ghost town, that you move out here and then it's gonna vanish and evaporate.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And again, what do the images, obviously trees, but it's beautiful residential neighborhoods, it's courthouses, it's libraries, it's schools, it's churches, kind of the focal points of the community. And that's what they were selling. So. Left-hand side, this is Parsons, Kansas. Right-hand side says Euclid Avenue, Pittsburgh, Kansas. Again, just lined with trees. The one on the left-hand side, that's Hildreth, Nebraska, probably from the water tower. I'm not for sure where it is in the community. But if you can see the close-up, I mean, it's just lined with trees. This one, Residence Street, Superior, Nebraska, lined with trees. How about Gresham? Little girl on the left-hand side, standing on the sidewalk. Division Street, looking east in Grand Island, Nebraska. Again, perfectly spaced trees. These grand homes. Left-hand side says a shady walk in Grand Island, Nebraska. This one here's Longfellow High School here in Kearney. Kind of trees, just kind of, visually setting the stage for the school.
They're pretty close together, aren't they?
I don't know what year that postcard was, but those trees likely were planted in honor of all the men who died in World War I, because that's what was there at Longfellow.
Left-hand side says 8th Street in York, Nebraska. I just like the perspective, it's tilted a little bit there. I love this one, Ainsworth. We are proud of our walks in Ainsworth, Nebraska. Lined with trees. Perfectly spaced trees. How about bird's eye view postcards from Kansas and Nebraska? Offer another set of perspectives. Nickerson's image from central Kansas demonstrates the typical grid-like pattern for communities in the Great Plains with streets, sidewalks, and houses surrounded by mature trees. So the left-hand side, that's Nickerson, Kansas. How about this one? This is from Winfield. If you look at the tagline, the beautiful city of trees. So again, the promotion of place. Welcome to Winfield, Kansas, the beautiful city of trees. So across the Great Plains over the last century, much of the literature encouraged farmers and ranchers to establish windbreaks, and deservedly so. Postcards, however, took promotional efforts to another level by showcasing and promoting forested focal points in streets as well as entire communities engulfed by trees. So on the left-hand side, that's the courthouse in Ward that you can barely see.
It's interesting to note there's not nearly that many trees today.
Yeah, yep. By visually presenting communities across the Great Plains as attractive, inviting landscapes, postcards help to market and sell place. And not just promotional, planting trees was also billed as a civic duty to country, community, family, and posterity. It took on a biblical aura with a generational aspect, and we saw that with all those newspaper articles. For over 100 years, scholars from a variety of fields have espoused and continue to promote the benefits of tree plantings in both urban areas and more rural locations. Duane et al. In 2000 state this, share the importance of trees along suburban streets and note that the trees are not intended merely to be decorative. Rather, they are included to create a spatial definition when the buildings fail to do so. The trees narrow the space and provide a natural bulk that contributes to the pedestrian's sense of enclosure and comfort. And I just think this is interesting. So things that were written about and talked about in the 1800s, early 1900s, here we are 100 plus years later, and we see a lot of the similar language. Speck in 2012, note that trees provide two key elements, shade and wind protection, to offset the urban heat islands. Speck in 2012 again also notes that studies from Philadelphia to Portland point to increased property values associated with trees, and that a street with consistent mature trees is like a cathedral, with the trunks serving as columns and the branches forming the vaults.
Makes me think of in Berlin, and pardon my German, but Unter der Lindenstrasse, the Linden Street going right through the center of Berlin. And that was such a cultural icon. It still is today.
Yeah, that's good. Today, many communities and neighborhoods are the recipients of past forestry efforts, which continue with initiatives like the Arbor Day Foundation's Tree City USA program and the Tiny Forest Movement. Kansas and Nebraska are both active in the program. Kansas has 94 Tree City USA communities, and Nebraska has 91. Kansas also has an official forest service created in 1887 that is the 5th oldest forestry agency in the country. Kansas possesses 5.2 million acres of forests and woodlands, occupying some 10% of the state's total land area. Some 95% of it is privately owned. Nebraska's natural resources districts, the NRDs, support a tree program to reduce energy costs and soil erosion, improve water quality, and protect livestock, all while providing cover for wildlife. So again, the reasons behind trees. Since 1972, more than 95 million trees have been planted through NRD programs, many via a variety of cost-share programs from government agencies and private conservation programs. Nebraska is also home to Bessie Nursery, established by the USDA Forest Service in 1903 to provide seedlings in the state, which is the longest continually operating Forest Service nursery in the nation. So we have a long history with tree planting here in Kansas and Nebraska as well. So that's it, but any other questions, comments? Yeah.
Dutch elm disease took all of our trees. We live in Hastings, but took all of our trees we've had to replant some trees, but they were evenly spaced. The Dutch elm disease took them, and now we're looking at the ash borer.
Yep.
So, and I'm finding in Hastings that we're not planting the big trees anymore. We're planting these little decorative
Yep.
and ornamental trees. And as I walk Hartwell Park every morning, I look at all of the cottonwoods and things that are still there, but they're getting to look pretty shabby, losing a lot of branches, so I think as a state, we need to start thinking of big trees that are gonna prosper. We won't be alive to see them, but we're taking advantage of what somebody else took had the foresight to plant.
Yep.
But they're disappearing.
Yeah. And you can say that for a lot of communities across the state. I mean, Kearney obviously benefits from what people did 50, 80 years ago in terms of the trees. I mean, the parks are just amazing, so, yeah.
Dr. Don Searcy, one of your colleagues earlier, taught geography here and did a workshop at Bessie Nursery for a number of years, and it was called Conservation Workshop. And there were a group of us, I think when I took the class, there were about 40 people, and we each were charged with a homework assignment before we ever showed up of doing something in our own home county to find what efforts had been made either through tree planting or whatever. I came from Garfield County and I took a flight over the county with a pilot and we photographed tree plantings, we photographed terraces, stock ponds, a variety of things. But what a cool
Oh, yeah.
class
That's
that
great.
was to go to Halsey.
Yeah.
There's a current display at Mona. A lady has gone out to the Bessie nursery and taken pictures of the man-planted forest at Halsey. Also pictures of the fire. The indigenous people told Bessie that they need to burn and they didn't do it and then it burned.
Yeah.
But she's questioning, how smart is it to force the environment into something that it's not? I'm not saying I don't love trees. I'm just saying this is a plains and a grassland, not a forest land. And are we trying, the question is, agree or not agree, just discussion, should we try and force it into something that it's not?
One of my favorite books, and some of the people here know this, Conrad Richter, The Trees, the Fields, and the Town in Ohio settlement era. Well, they had the opposite issue, and it took them decades to cut down enough of those huge trees to farm 40 acres. So, like you were telling, the promotion of the Great Plains as a place that's easy to come and establish a farm, far easier than having to cut down those huge trees. But there again, the European settlers were bringing their culture with them. But the people were looking for some way to survive there, because as more people came in, obviously you didn't have animals to hunt anymore or furs to get and so on. Anyway, it's just interesting to me, the contrast between the two areas.
Yeah. You know, I think about that quite a bit, and to kind of dovetail on that, I mean, I've been collecting sod house postcards. And just things like that,
Oh, everyone.
here we are in 2025, we don't understand what people did in the 1800s, I mean, how they survived in coming here. But, so Ohio, in 1620, how much of Ohio was tree covered?
All of it.
About 99%. I mean, 100, and that's kind of typically a lot of the east states, they were completely covered in trees. There might have been a few, spots that were open, and then, I mean, imagine those people struggling to, try and plant 10 acres. And then coming to the plains and,
Wow.
We had 160.
yeah, I mean, it was, their world is turned upside down of not having trees. So yes, I mean, they could take off with a plow and, plow 10 acres in a a week or something, but they had no trees. I mean, just, it's,
Do you have any of those railroad promotion posters that show
Yeah.
this is what it is, and then 5 years, and then 10 years?
Yeah.
How it went from grass to trees?
this progression, so, yeah.
Were trees affected by the Dust Bowl, and did you find, if so, did you see any kind of remarks, literature reflecting on that versus like the prior, efforts?
Gosh, how can I answer that? It definitely plays into kind of landscape ecology today in terms of windbreaks and trees. You know, over the years, they've tried to plant ginormous shelter breaks across the Great Plains, not just Nebraska. Some parts of it have been planted, but coming out of the Dust Bowl, for example, and I don't know which government agency were promoting that, it was soil conservation or someone, but I mean, we're talking like county-wide belts of trees going up through the Great Plains, multiple states. And so, yeah, they saw the value of doing that and trying to slowing, you know, wind erosion and, I don't know if I answered that very well, but,
They're taking them all out now, though.
Well, they're dying too.
yeah, so.
Well, if you drive through Kearney right now, you realize we've had 5 or 6 years of really extremely dry years, 5 or 6 years prior. If you drive through Kearney now, you see the tops of trees, you see a lot of dead in a lot of the trees. The drought, I think the drought has really affected our trees here. Plus, I think we have so many sprays now that are damaging a lot of our tree populations. Sprays, except for red cedars.
Yeah.
They also have different problems with it, like a lot of the trees that we planted will not reproduce. That they grow and they grow big and then they die. So that's it. We're better at picking what we want to have that we grow, and so we plant different trees all the time.
Go ahead, Amy.
I was, obviously, I think what sparked your interest was that this promotion of place through
Yeah.
postcards. So I guess my question is, do you think it worked?
I mean, clearly it's hard to argue against, a flood of people came. And part of that too, in the 1890s, there were 3 years in the 1890s, it barely rained in kind of central western Nebraska. And so coming out of the 1890s, and postcards were perfectly timed to promote and sell place of the rains come back, the trees are growing. And yeah, I just, I stumbled into these cards and they're almost comical when you look at them. They're just terrible. In terms of a picture of the school or the courthouse that you can't even see. It's just totally tree covered. And it never said, we did this on purpose. We have to find more. But you see that in what they were thinking. It was very intentional to present Kearney and those Kearney cards of the schools, or the churches. They're just covered in trees. So, yeah.
How many postcards do you have? Of trees?
We'll
It's
talk
just of the
later
trees.
about that. So,
Yeah, when I'm not here.
yeah. So I'm doing much better.
They don't take up much space.
Yeah, another bad question for me. So, yeah.
Well, a couple comments. Probably 30 years ago, we received trees. We lived on a farm from the NRD, and they were maybe this tall. And I don't know if we planted them or they did. Doesn't matter. We didn't have a water source closely available. So there I am carrying buckets of water to this windbreak. And then we moved off of that farm, and I drive back by there now, and I kind of get upset because that was a lot of work, and those trees really grew well. But that's just a little personal thing. I'm trying to, anyway, get out of my mind. They did well, so that's a good thing. But I drive Highway 30 a lot going to Cheyenne, and somewhere along there is the most beautiful green windbreak along the road, and like so many farmers or landowners, they mow the land, the grass, the weeds, prairie grass up to that windbreak. But some it must be a haven for wildlife, because turkeys came out of there. And others have told me they've seen deer that use that windbreak. And it's well established, and it doesn't have the little bushes that NRD wanted you to plant to help with the pheasant population or the bird population inside those trees. And then also, and I thought, well, that's not gonna be so pretty down the road, but there are places that these same trees are planted in other areas of the pasture. And if you've driven up there on a windy day, you know what their use is. But it just, for some reason, that struck me one day when I was going by there. I thought, that is a gorgeous windbreak. Nice and green, and it looked like cedar, but it wasn't half dead. It was just
It's probably
beautiful.
western red cedar, not-
And up there was not a lot to see.
Yeah, and even just as we're here sharing, you know, thinking about this transition of people who came from the east to the Great Plains, it's just interesting to me. I mean, so Gail, we're both farm kids. She's from Iowa, I'm from Northwest Missouri. I mean, look at rainfall. So Kearney will just say 25 inches of precipitation a year. So my hometown, you're probably at 35, 38, somewhere in that ballpark. Gail's hometown, you're probably in the mid-40s in terms of rainfall. So, I mean, my whole life, being a farm kid, what did we do all winter long? It was cutting trees. I mean, we had to do that, and people still do, to try and control the trees. And then you get out here, and it's kind of a luxury to have trees, and not that people don't, you know, try and control the trees or whatever out here now with cedar trees. But it's just interesting, that transition is still kind of playing out in the landscape. But again, go back to people coming here. I just can't get over, you know, honey, let's move to Custer County. You know, you lived in a sod house. There's not a tree in sight. I mean, it's hard to even understand what people did, so, yeah.
Talking about a windbreak, if you wanna really see one that I know was started when I was quite young, it's on Highway 2. It's 1 mile long, and it starts at the Gibbon Road, and it goes 1 mile east. My grandmother lived on the Gibbon Road, so that was always our clue where we were going to turn, because I grew up in Ravenna. Where we were going to turn to go to Velavotsky's. And it is still there, and so if you ever want to see a good windbreak, it's been there since I was a little kid, and I'm 81 years old.
Yeah, I remember.
So,
Yeah.
So as you cut down cedar trees, do they grow back? Because a lot of pastures are being overtaken
Come back.
with cedar trees. Can they just cut them off and not deal with the roots, but do the trees grow back from
I
that?
assume they're treating the stumps somehow, but I'm not sure.
That's kind of a problem.
But I know in the last few years, red cedars, I mean, kind of a statewide problem, and people have recognized trying to control the cedar population, if you will, so.
I think the city of Kearney has done some progressive things. If you check with their website, there are certain trees that they recommend and certain trees that they say, please don't plant. And we planted a tree in front of my mother-in-law's house and got $100 rebate from the city for that. And you have to apply for it before you plant the tree, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
encouraging.
You know, and even as the discussion talking about different types of trees, I mean, now, collectively, not any of you in here, of course, but we're so short-sighted in terms of, we're planting decorative trees that, I mean, we're probably gonna get torn out the next time they put it in a parking lot somewhere. We don't think about 50 years, 100 years down the road. I mean, that's just not, again, as I'm standing here, my dad and I planted some bur oak trees probably in about 76, 78, somewhere in that ballpark. About that big around now.
That's my story of black walnuts here in Buffalo County, exactly my story. We planted in 74, and 10 acres of black walnuts. Thought we'd send our grandkids to college. It'll be great grandkids probably before we sell any black walnuts off of that.
Yeah. So we planted a lot of walnut trees. So in Missouri, see, they'll grow fast. We get so much more rainfall. But like the bur oak trees, but you know, they'll live 200, 300, 400 years. So, you know, we just don't have that mindset to think long-term when we're talking generations down the road, so.
Where you wanna see promotion of trees, go to Nebraska City
right across from Arbor Lodge Park. You know, the park is just covered with trees. We had a fundraiser here with the Sandhill Cranes in Nebraska City. Their fundraiser was to decorate these trees. You know, so you have artists decorating these trees. The apple trees, the orchards, you know, it just never ends. J. Sterling Morton, he really was a good promoter of the trees.
Mhm.
So, and it still continues today.